I want to begin by saying that I have made a terrible mistake. And that mistake is that yesterday at 3 p.m., I drank a 16-ounce cup of coffee after very sparse amounts of caffeine. And I have not slept. And I'm just going to be honest with you, I've not slept since then. So bear with me. Hopefully everything I say makes sense to you, because I sure am not going to be able to tell if it doesn't. I'm going to be in my own little blissful, exhausted cloud this afternoon. But hopefully everything I have to say today is of interest and coherent. Those are my two goals. The other thing I want to say is we're going to be talking about AI, and we're going to be talking about data sets. And a little bit, we're not going to go too in depth, but some of the stuff that's in those data sets, I'm just going to mention, and some of those things are kind of bummers. I'm just going to put it that way for now. So if you're just like not feeling like you want to deal with that right now, I'm letting you know. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's in there, and some of it is kind of hard. But we're not going to go too in depth, but I just want to let people know. So with that said, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Eryk Salvaggio, and I'm a couple of things. I'm an instructor for responsible AI at a place called Elisava, Barcelona, which is a school of engineering and design. I'm also the emerging technology research advisor at the Siegel Family Endowment. And so I look at things like particularly artificial intelligence, as well as things like decentralized communities like Mastodon and those kinds of things, to just think about what the future might look like in terms of the good that it can do, but also so we're aware of the possibilities of future harms. And a lot of that shapes the way that I think about artificial intelligence right now. But another thing that really shapes the way I think about artificial intelligence is that I am the third thing, which is an artist. And I've been an artist working with digital technology for 25 years now. The joke is always that you must be shocked I look so young. But my hair's gotten too gray to make that joke anymore. Yeah, about 25 years starting with the internet, working with internet art, digital media, and now I work with AI. I started working with AI back when it was GANs, which meant you had to build your own data set. I had to go out, I had to take my own photographs or find public domain images. A lot of what I did relied on Wikimedia Commons, things like Flickr Commons as well. But they relied a lot on Commons projects. And I had a real gratitude to these projects. And I've also been working with Wikipedia on my own for a long time too, and built actually created the article on algorithmic bias. So some of that's going to be in this talk too. So it is great to be here. And as I mentioned, I'm an artist and I work with AI. I work with AI from a critical position. I'm a digital artist who cares deeply about the impacts of technology on the social world. And I write and teach about AI, specifically right now about generative AI and what we have started to call AI images, sometimes synthetic images. And as an example, I want to show, sorry, someone's requesting to record. Do I allow them to? Oh.
So if you wanted to make sure that you get to see this, if you don't mind saying aloud.
Do I, is it?
Say deny if that feels more comfortable.
I need somebody who's running the conference to tell me if it's okay. I feel like these are all going to be available. Okay. Should I just deny for the sake of safety with the assurance that it will be archived? Okay, sounds like a yes. Sorry, Brian. It will be available to you. I'm going to apply these permissions to all future requests in this meeting. Okay. Sorry, Brian. So as an example, I wanted to show a new piece, a quick snippet of a new piece. And then I want to move on to some of the things that I've learned about art, archives, and data, and hopefully to think about the relationship that something as strong of the community that is as strong as the one that surrounds Wikimedia Commons can bring to the way we think about building data sets for AI in the future. We heard some of this earlier today, and I want to think a little bit about like what we can actually bring and what the Wikimedia community can offer. So here's just an example to show you some of the type of art I make, and I'm going to talk about it before I show it. This is a piece called Swim. I call it a meditation on visual archives and the transformation of cultural memory into training data. So it is specifically engaging in that process. Not right now. Swim will show in a moment. I'm just introducing the video at the moment. So as you watch it, you'll see that the film is slowly diffused as a subject is frolicking underwater and slowly dissolves. And I think about this as a visualization of images in our archives turning into training data. And I'm going to talk about what that means and why I'm uncomfortable with that in a minute. But I just wanted to show a very brief snippet. You're probably not hearing the sound. The sound's a big part of it. Yeah, it's the only speaker we have. So you're seeing archival, I'm going to lower this, archival footage of a film from, this one's from the Internet Archive. Now I'm getting an echo. Oh. And I wanted to take something from archives the way that a lot of the generative AI models are currently using images from archives. In this case, it's a film. And as this film goes on, it's about 11 minutes long in total. The video has been slowed down, and slowly it just dissolves into pure noise, which is exactly what generative AI models do to these images. And I want to walk you through some of that and show you some examples of what it is exactly that AI is doing to the images in the archive and how the archive actually shapes what comes out on the other side of generative AI models when you use things like prompts. So this is a pure image of noise. And what is interesting about this, and what I think a lot of people don't realize, is we live in a time we're talking a lot about artificial intelligence models that are used to generate pictures. And what really is happening is every time someone writes a prompt into something like DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion, on the back end, this is being generated randomly, just a random constellation of pixels. And what's happening is the AI system is trying to find patterns in these random assemblages of colorful noise. And it's finding those patterns in ways that are molded by the training data that have been fed to it. And I liken this to if we were to go out camping and let's say you trusted me and I were to show you the nighttime sky and I were to say to you, look up there, right there, that's the Big Dipper. And you look up at the sky and you look at this image of the nighttime sky and you say, the Big Dipper, where is that? Where is the Big Dipper? And then you find it. You say, oh, that must be the Big Dipper. But if there's any astronomers in the room, you know that that is not the Big Dipper. You have found a pattern, you found a cluster that looks like the Big Dipper because I've told you it was there. That's exactly what happens with an AI image model when you tell it that you want to see a picture. When you want to see a picture of flowers, it's finding these flowers in pure noise. And so how does it do that? It's not some mysterious process. It's doing this from training data. It's doing this from archives. And we've started calling these archives data sets, but they're just archives. They're just archives of pictures. And I think this relationship is important to differentiate. But here's what it does. When it finds these images online, it Slowly, well, I say slowly. It doesn't do this slowly at all. It does it very quickly, but I'm going to do it slowly here. It breaks these images down. It removes information. It strips information out of the image. And it compares what is happening in the image to the way that the noise sort of moves through this image. So here you see it's a little bit of noise. I'm going to say it's been added. What's actually happened is information is removed. Those two terms are identical. So what we're seeing is information is being removed from that image. But this information that's being removed is being removed in something called a Gaussian distribution pattern. So it follows a certain it's a very complex, we're not going to see that pattern in this illustration, but it's there, and a machine can trace that back. So if it can add, and I'm going to say add noise, but if it can add this noise, it can figure out how that noise spread and walk it back to this image. And it can keep doing that, and it can keep adding more noise and walking it back to the original image. And eventually, it just does this until the image is essentially completely obliterated. But I want to point something out here. You can still see something of the flowers. And so the model has this caption that's associated with an image. Anyone who's uploaded an image to Wikimedia Commons or Wikipedia and written the caption for it has probably contributed training data that says this flower is a flower, is the word flower. And so the way this image is breaking down, this stuff that's left, that sort of lingers longest, is sort of most strongly correlated with that word flower. And so that's what it's doing. It's doing math. It's just saying flower is a category, and I've encountered this word associated with an image, and when that image is destroyed, it gets destroyed in this kind of pattern. And from there, not that button, it can take an image like this, and it can go all the way back to that original image. But here's what happens when you use an AI image tool. The same thing, the same patterns that it has memorized, the same mathematical formulas that it has, quote unquote, learned from these images, is applied to random noise now. So it has to find the Big Dipper in the nighttime sky. It has to find patterns that closely resemble those flowers, and it has to strip away the noise in ways that look something like a flower. And so this is an imaginary example, but we can see it's starting to add some noise. There's some clusters of pixels of similar colors emerging, and it might grab onto that and start sharpening it and start removing noise in that direction and start creating something that resembles flower petals and stems. And that is how an AI image is made. And so in this, I think it's really important to acknowledge the role that archives play. When we make an image with an AI system, we are creating a data visualization. These images don't copy and paste aspects of images into new arrangements. Stable Diffusion or Midjourney is the result of billions of these images that have been assembled from a wide variety of sources, Wikidata and Flickr images certainly among them. And to build these models, these images are stripped of the information in stages, and each time information is removed, the model learns how that noise is distributed through the image. It all comes back to the training data. This is why I call these images data visualizations or infographics. They represent the most statistically likely representation of the words you give it. Without data, without that training archive, these images aren't going to exist. The images in the training data come to shape and structure the randomly generated noise that the model is starting with. And in a sense, the content of the archive is haunting these images. I'm an artist, so I get to take a little bit of a romantic perspective on this. But basically, the archives are influencing every single sort of decision about every pixel that gets written and adjusted. And embedded into that idea are collected memory, which is in our archives. And this can also lead to a lot of problems in the content. So here's an image text pair. This should be very familiar to everyone in this room who's worked with Wikipedia. You have the pixel information in the image, right? You have this picture of a peach. And you have a caption, the fruit of the peach with the seed or stone inside. And so this is actually from the flowers article, but this doesn't look like a flower, right? So it's going to be compared to every other thing with similar captions that have been described for every other image. And if it says, actually, this thing doesn't really look like a flower, right? It's probably going to be ignored. It's not going to really make much of a dent in the way that these models present an image of a flower. And if you see fruits, maybe this will show up in fruit, right? It looks more like what we might see lots and lots of pictures of that are associated with that word fruit, and especially the word peach. So you can see how the labels are sort of defining what comes out, even if it's not directly. Even if you could make 1 million AI images and never get this one peach, you might see traces of this peach in what comes out when you ask for fruit or peach or stone or seed. But there's something a little weird that happens with this, because what we're talking about in a kind of abstract sense, I would argue, are stereotypes. It's a stereotype of a flower. It's a stereotype of a peach. And here we can see an image which comes up when you ask the model to make, this is Stable Diffusion, when you ask it to make an American. And to the left, you see some of the training data, which is not from, I mean, some of it may be from Wikipedia or Wiki Commons. Some of it might be from Flickr, but most of it is just kind of grabbed from everywhere, from every corner of the web. It's not really a curated archive. It's a grabbed assemblage of images. And as a result of that, it's not really carefully thought about, right? If I uploaded this to a Wikipedia article and I captioned it American, right? That's going to get flagged. In Layon, which is the data set that this is built on, there's nobody looking at it. There's nobody to say, actually, let's take this out. And as a result, I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, you don't see cowboy hats, but they're in the training data. They're not in this image of the training data, but there are a lot of cowboy hats in the data for American, and you see it here. You also see a lot of American flags, right? That word American is appearing in a lot of images, and it might be American flags and like American people. But here's the thing that I think is really strange and illuminating. The 4 guys holding the big gulp. You see that up in the top? That's appeared 4 times out of like 20, which means that it's actually like really strong in the data. Like it's really informing the idea of what an American looks like. And what is this guy holding? He's holding a giant cup. And this may sound kooky, but if you go in and you generate images of Americans using this particular model, Stable Diffusion, the same one I used, you will see a weird amount of people holding cups. The information is there. It's abstracted, right? But it is there. And this meme and the way memes work in general, right? They're constantly recirculated. They're constantly slightly changed, right? So it's registered as a new image. It's impacting what comes out. So this is really interesting when I think about what it is that we are looking at when we look at an AI-generated image. And it's not all kind of funny. To the left here, we see the training data for girl. And if we look closely, you'll see most of it, because it's public domain images, are old photographs of like maybe Victorian era. I don't know. I'm not an expert in dating photographs, but it's mostly white girls. And to the right, if you ask for Black girls, the images you see there are what you get for that search in Layon, in the training data. And you might say, well, why are there images missing? And the answer is because it is hardcore pornography, which I don't want to show you for obvious reasons. There's a lot of that in the training data, and this has been well documented online, the way that these words are used and the way that these words show up. Even Google had to like hack the search results for that term, Black girls, because it was overwhelmed with that type of content. So these biases are there. They're there mechanically, right? It's not just a sort of social issue. Of course, it is a social issue, but it is also a mechanical and technical issue in the way these models work. And part of that is because we're building these data sets without thinking about them, right? No one is going in and saying, why is this happening? And how can we change it? Because no one is looking at the training data. Which is why I think if we care about the future, we need to think carefully about the content of the archives. How our digital archives like Wikimedia Commons come to be created and labeled, I think that's a big deal. And because these images reflect the content of those archives, it matters that the archives we use reflect cultural diversity and the types of things that just make sense, the types of conversations that we need to have about what a person is, what a person looks like, what a thing is, right? What one of the other examples is a power plug. Why does a power plug from an AI system sort of look like an American power plug when there's a wide diversity of power plugs, right? So these are the types of questions that I think a community like Wikimedia Commons is constantly talking about. And I will say, I don't think it's perfect. I think a lot of you are ready to tell me it's not perfect. And certainly, you know, shout out to the other room. They're going to tell you that it's not perfect either. But there are humans having conversations, and that is what's missing from the training data in AI. So an apple is created from the features that overlap descriptions of apples on the internet, but so too is a description of a doctor, which will show you a bunch of white dudes in lab coats. Recently, a website called Rest of World found a bunch of search terms, and they asked for 3,000 images. And when they asked for a Mexican person, they got 3,000 images of men in mustaches and sombreros. So it's getting this information from somewhere. How does it know? I always ask, how does it know what a criminal looks like? How does it know what a doctor or a professor looks like? Why is it making those decisions? Some of the models are trying to fix that on the other end. A lot of them aren't. And when they're open and they're not centralized, it's less likely to happen. And I'm not a big fan of the centralization of these models, but I'm also not a big fan of open and uncurated, unthought about data sets. And that is why I think we can learn by thinking about them not as data sets, but as archives. Bear with me. When we talk about data in a generative AI model, we're talking about images. And when we talk about data sets, we're actually talking about vast collections of images. And so it wouldn't be a mistake to say that a vast collection of images is an archive. At least it can be. But we don't say archive, we say data sets. And an archive, I think, proposes a greater degree of responsibility over what's inside it. Archives are curated. Wikimedia collections rely on humans to examine and assess those uploaded images. I know because I was one of them. In artificial intelligence circles, we say that humans are in the loop. And Wikimedia Commons is a community-curated archive. But it is also a data set. If we look at it from the AI perspective, it is a data set of 45 million images. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure someone in this room can correct me. 45 million? 60 million? Okay. So that's 60 million images, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the training data that is being used for these models, which is 5 billion images. These images get stripped down. They use various automated filters, which basically compare if the caption matches the image, and that's it. And so it cuts down to about 2.3 billion images, which, you know, that's plenty. I'm not going to be able to look at those. But as a result, by archival standards, these data sets are a disaster. I don't want to blame Leon. Leon has some surprising overlaps with the Wikimedia community. I found Leon is actually run by volunteers. It is run by volunteers who are passionate about open data. But every decision that the Wikimedia community makes, a robot is making, specifically a tool called Clip, if anyone's interested in that. I won't go into too much of the detail. It is the project of scraping from Common Crawl, very little filtration of what is collected and what it has stored. It contains captions and links to images, and it has been proven to contain copyrighted material. More troubling, however, is a recent study from the Stanford Internet Observatory, which found that this data set, Leon, contained over 1,000 documented images of child sexual abuse. About 3,000 more are suspected, but the URLs that link to those images were no longer functioning. But it's in the data, it's in the training models, and it's there, arguably, when we generate an AI image, the same way that that image of a peach might shape the way we get an image of a fruit. And I think there's just something fundamentally unsettling about that. And there's something fundamentally unsettling about handing off the way we make images to a machine that has no idea about our priorities and our goals, our desires, right? Our sort of social infrastructure. So Wikimedia Commons is certainly a part of this training data. But there's a night and day difference between the way Wikimedia Commons has been built, and I think Wikimedia Commons serves as an excellent example of how we might build open, transparent data sets for AI training in the future, should we desire to, which is also its own question. The thing that sets Wikimedia Commons apart from Leon is that it was not designed to be a quote-unquote data set. It was designed to be an archive. This is a semantic distinction with real meaning. The debates over deletion and inclusion, the volunteers who curate Wikimedia Commons, the nitpicking about licensing. I had an upload of a Syrian postage stamp from the 1980s that was flagged as a copyright violation. Just the most obscure things get flagged by this community, right? And at the time, I was like, that's my Syrian postage stamp that I found. But that's what we need, kind of, right? We need that vigilance. There's at least with Wikimedia Commons, there's at least an effort to determine consensus and fact check things from the captions on the commons, matching the image, on the image to the context in which images appear on Wikipedia, which is also that text is also defining the way these images are understood. So Commons is, in a way, an ideal structure for building good AI systems. And again, I'm not sure that we want to do that, but people are doing it. And I think that Wikimedia could really say, we want to do it differently. Of course, representation gaps remain on Wikimedia Commons. It is still largely oriented to white English-speaking countries with internet access, and bias is there on the talk pages and in Commons deletion requests, article deletion requests, right? We can't ignore that. It is an archive built by voluntary contributions. Every image that's there is because someone put it there, someone wanted it there, ideally. That's not the case with copyright scrape data, right? When artists are upset that their images are being used in this training data, it's because no one asked them, right? They aren't volunteering. Consent has not been considered in what's been built into this training data set of Leon. Whereas on Wikimedia Commons, if it's not yours, it's not there, right? And it is moderated through the efforts of volunteers committed to closing gaps and broadening the scope of what's included. And I think that's a powerful starting point. By contrast, AI image tools were built on images grabbed without clear consent, oftentimes documenting, as I just mentioned, personal trauma and oftentimes historical atrocities. Images that would immediately be flagged for deletion on Commons are never even reviewed. Wikimedia Commons is an archive concerned about balance, albeit an imperfect balance, and a complex concept of neutrality. But by contrast, AI image tools were built on a data set that is literally used to study hate speech online. If you're familiar with Common Crawl, nothing against Common Crawl. It's an amazing resource for research, right? But just because it's important for researching and understanding the way humans act online, is it the ideal tool for reproducing the way humans act online, which is exactly what we're asking AI to do. Often I'm told that there must be open data, and that open data means that companies should be able to train on anything they want. But that's not what open data means to me. I come back to this distinction between data sets and archives. If we want to build a more responsible AI, if we want to build tools that benefit rather than exploit, it starts by thinking about training data as a cultural archive. An archive that requires stewardship, allows for debate and discussion, and which makes spaces for people who would not be represented under the status quo. An archive requires curation. If we want to build responsible, beneficial AI, we need to curate what feeds it. So let's go back to this idea of data in the data set. What does it mean for something to be data? The Oxford Dictionary, which is a fancy way of saying I Googled it, tells us what data is. Facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. And this strikes me as a weird way to think about art and historical photos and cultural visual heritage. I've never gone to a museum to be moved by the facts they've assembled for my analysis. On a certain level of abstraction, humans might do this, but I find that level of abstraction to be so wide as to be useless to this particular conversation. What are the facts assembled in a Rothko painting? There are no facts in this Rothko painting. The data about this image is something else. The data contains facts. It's color values associated with pixels in a digital copy of the painting. It might be the date that the painting is made, the measurements of the canvas. These are the facts of an image. That's the data of the image. And when a computer looks at Rothko's work, that is the type of information it sees. This is the type of information that gets abstracted and reproduced. As a person with an interest in the digital humanities, this data is incredibly useful. We can use it to analyze millions of lines of text and novels and code them for themes, right? We can understand the way people wrote and spoke, the way people painted. There's a usefulness to using it as a tool for analysis. There's a use of this data in learning about the art that people make, learning about the art that people make. And it's important to value that research and protect that research. But in the process of measuring a work of art in countless ways, we document some of the least meaningful aspects of what make it meaningful. The problem with framing a collection of art as a data set is that it captures nothing about why that art is there. And it captures nothing that I want to reproduce when I make art. I do not express myself through the reduction of Rothko or Batman into pixelated assemblages. Or here a single pixelated assemblage of Rothko Batman. I don't mean to say that AI art can't be expressive. I think that argument is tired. We express ourselves in all kinds of ways. One of my favorite artists is Namjoon Paik, and he made art from breaking televisions. So if you can break a TV and I can be moved by that, I can care about that, then certainly you can make something from these data sets that's interesting. But let's move away from that conversation and let's look at the things that have become quote-unquote training data. There's archival images of victims of the Holocaust in these images, in these data sets. There's images of the abuse of children, the abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib. There's racist images. There's misogynistic images. I don't want that in there. I don't want that in the things I make. And if we want to say that we have no responsibility to affirm the contextual and social meanings of these images, then you might agree that we do have a responsibility to reject the exploitation of others when we collect this data. That there comes no benefit from making images that contain even the slightest residue or derive the slightest benefit from the exploitation of a child. Because these images deep within the data sets do haunt the structure and shape of the images that come out. Future models might be fine-tuned, and already we've seen that data sets can focus on these kinds of images explicitly in order to generate similar content. And if you're feeling repulsed, I apologize, and that's the end of that deep dive into that aspect. But this is what happens when we treat this as nothing more than data. These are what happens when we treat images as just a fact to be analyzed. And my analysis concludes with the realization that the way we're structuring AI is as if images have no meaning. And to treat these images as nothing but data ignores the reasons we make images, ignores what it is that images document and describe, communicate. In other words, it removes the culture from what is meant to be culture. I know many artists hate AI. I'm a digital artist and I distrust big tech. I'm also driven by a hopeful vision of AI. I want an AI that humans shape. I want people to have a say in how their data is used. I want an AI that was built with consent, possibly even with joy. Could you imagine that? I know for many of you, especially if you're in the midst of an editing war right now, the idea that the Wikimedia ecosystem as a source of joy and community may not always feel that way. But it's my word hope that if we build AI systems from those values, we build better systems. Systems that can be governed and steered by people, exerting agency over data instead of data exerting power over us. So I started this piece with the talk with an image that was about swimming in the tensions. There's a lot of tensions in AI that merit meaningful discussion, and I'm always surprised by the rush I see in our attempts to just solve them, to just answer those questions. Part of having humans in the loop, whether we're building a data set or a democracy or an archive is about friction and dialogue and trade-offs. It's about negotiation. There's this argument for open data, certainly. Data sets built and distributed freely with full transparency on the one hand. On the other hand, these data sets might collect material we don't want them to have for this purpose, to be used towards purposes we don't support. And should our personal data be part of these data sets if we don't want it to be? Should companies lock up their training data? If so, how do we build transparency into those systems to know what's inside them? There's a lot of tensions about copyright law and fair use and whether training data should even be fair use. We argue that the substance of what's collected from these archives of images is just facts about pixel distribution and word correspondences. And part of me says that's fair. We ought to have tools to examine vast sums of text and images, to do research, to learn. But it feels different when I'm paying a company to play with this information, to create new shapes from people's personal expressions and even their painful experiences. To say that this is all data is a bit like telling me that my dog is just atoms or that my memories are just chemicals. Under one microscope, that's all true. But the validity of emotion, of being human, the principle of dignity itself, is that we can resist reducing the world to pure mechanics. Symbols are the building blocks of meaning. If we strip images and words of their context, they lose symbolic value. Sorry, OpenAI sent someone to arrest me. Sorry, joke. I know. Well, welcome to the room. Symbols are the building blocks of meaning. If we strip images and words of their context, they lose that symbolic value. And if they lose that connection to that social and cultural fabric, they lose meaning. And so do we as a culture, as people. Wikimedia projects are always a network, links to links, right? The context is always there. A Wikipedia page that does not link out or have links in, we call it an orphan. As I wrote that, I was like, should we call them orphans? And yet that's everything in our AI training data is isolated from all the surrounding context. It's isolated. 5 billion data points devoid of connections, 5 billion red links. For me, as an artist who works with images and archives, there's a great care that is required when we think about what's inside of the archive. It's my hope that Wikimedia continues to see knowledge as a collective project, to push for more people to be involved, not less, for humans to be involved, to insist that meaning and context matters, and that to place things into those contexts requires complexity. That is to say, I hope you all continue to build an archive first and to value the meaning of what you've built and all that rests within it. Thank you. I think that's time. I was really worried I wouldn't fill the time, but I think I did. So thank you. Cheers. And this is me. Find me. If you have questions, find me. Oh, we have 5 minutes for questions. So you found me. Does anyone want to say anything or ask anything? Yeah.
I was looking very, I got more out of this than I expected to. Right?
Well, that's flattering.
One thing I was thinking of is, you're talking about the commons sort of curated a more ideal way to be used.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that, well, could the sub-project or another possible project be, creating a set of commons images used specifically as training data, and we can do things like tag images in a way that says maybe your image generator doesn't want to use this for particular purposes. I mean, I've worked a lot with DALL-E on Microsoft Bing, and I mean, just getting it, writing a prompt that gets you what you want, even with the detail you have, can be really frustrating.
Yeah.
And although I did in one instance, it's not as relevant to what you're talking here, so I can talk about it. Yeah, I think what we really need to work on with AI image generation prompts, getting the parsing of that better, because I think that's very important.
Yeah. On the point of sort of tagging and Wikimedia Commons, I think I would warn or at least take very seriously the idea of drift into the idea that it would be training data. That's kind of what I'm pushing against, but I am saying that the models used for Wikimedia Commons might be very helpful in a separate project that is used for building a data set in this way. Yeah. maybe one more question before, I mean, you all want to eat. But if someone wants to ask a question while people are eating. Anything? All right. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to the future. Welcome to the Wikimedia AI Futures panel. Yeah, so welcome. The idea here today we're going to explore. We have this crazy technology called AI, which maybe it's one technology, maybe it's 500 ones. It's changing a lot of things. It's threatening a lot of things. How can we best use it in a Wikimedia context so that it is a good thing and not a terrible thing? And we have some experts here to address various aspects of the intersection of Wikimedia and artificial intelligence so that we have hopefully a positive future and not a horrible one. And maybe Wikimedia can be part of the good part of the future. So we have here Lane Rasberry, user Blue Raspberry, coming to us from the University of Virginia and the Chinchilla Cafe of Charlottesville, Virginia. We have Isaac Johnson, representing some of the Wikimedia Foundation's AI work, maybe Liftwing, some other initiatives. Yeah. We have Jimena Gallardo, Dr. X, come to us from City University of New York, and who's used AI in some pedagogy projects and has some thoughts about copyrights and the clash between the corporate titans and the little Wikipedians. And we have Amir Aharoni, who is our international language maven, the master of all languages and especially scripts, and trying to make all of your scripts compliant. If you speak a language that has under 10 million people, talk to this person, especially if there's any possible issue with your Wikipedia. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, maybe Lane, you want to start?
I've got slides. So we're talking about Wikimedia AI in the future. And I myself, my own take on this is also adding democracy into this. So Wikipedia AI democracy in the future. My name's Lane Rasberry. I'm something called a Wikimedian in residence, a staff Wikipedian at a university, the University of Virginia. I'm in particular in the School of Data Science. Data science also means AI, means machine learning, means a lot of things. It's one of these technical terms, one of these new fields. What I'm going to talk about today, what AI threats to democracy exist. Let's have a review. Let's get on the same page. What is Wikipedia's role in this? Like, why should Wikipedia be a stakeholder in this? And what you as an individual can do to protect democracy using Wikipedia as a tool and support system. AI threatens democracy. So this is just something to say. I'm not going to say there's not benefits from AI, but there's definitely some problems coming out of AI. I pulled some headlines. These are just from the past couple of weeks. We could go into years of these headlines, but just reading some of these deepfakes deceive voters in India and Indonesia. State legislators warning of deceptive election ads, tighten AI rules. Regulations difficult. Elections and disinformation are colliding like never before in 2012. You can pull my slides out from the agenda of this conference. So my slides are public. You can click on any of these headlines, read the articles for yourself. There's different problems happening. These are continual. So what are the problems that people talk about continuously? Well, AI, just like so many technologies, just like capital in general in a capitalist society, the benefits go to the already rich. It could be the case that 99% of the benefits and the money and the wealth from AI are going to go to people who are already rich. It's not actually uplifting people's lives or benefiting the common person. It also transfers wealth from the public commons, our shared public heritage, gets marketed, gets sold back to us. A lot about AI and the way it's being used. It's legal. I'm not saying anyone's breaking the law, but it's what a typical person would call unethical. There's a lot of experts in a lot of situations, journalists, book writers. They predict different kinds of doom, and I think we should listen to these people. And in general, over the past few decades, tech has a history of abusing society. I'm not saying that good things don't come from tech, but certainly bad things do. We need to be wary about these things. I don't think that you should fear AI exactly. The entities that I'm scared of are the humans, especially the rich humans, the corporations, who are using AI to transfer resources from the poor to the rich. This is the big problem that I see over and over again with AI. So what does Wikipedia have to do with either AI or democracy? Well, Wikipedia is the most requested, published, accessed, and consulted source of information on just about every topic in just about every language and country and culture. Extremely influential. And when I say Wikipedia is influential, I mean it's influential in whatever you care about. Wikipedia influences thought on politics, public health, energy, transportation, climate change, all journalism, all research, all discourse. Everyone who looks up a topic and seeks general information, whatever country or language or topic they're looking at, they go to Wikipedia and they are aware of what Wikipedia is publishing on these things. The information in Wikipedia influences thought everywhere in the world. Every election issue Wikipedia has influence on. About Wikipedia's position, if you're looking for different ways to explain this, I'm just going to pull out the Wikimedia Foundation annual report from 2017. The Wikimedia Foundation made a claim that there are billions of readers. We're talking about a significant percentage of all the people who walk this earth consume or are influenced by Wikipedia content. It's a tremendously popular and visible position to be in. Wikipedia, I believe this is debatable, but I believe this, Wikipedia is the global multilingual default of shared objective truth. If two people are going to argue over something, Wikipedia is a baseline where people try to come up with some fact checking and see what exactly was out there. We are the fact checkers. All these AI shenanigans that are happening, all this misinformation that's coming out, I'm telling you that Wikipedia is a significant avenue by means of which we do the fact checking and we put these shenanigans in check. We try to counter them by what's in the Wikipedia articles. What can you do to make a better future? Well, you can make a better future. I'm going to tell you to believe in yourself. If there's something that you care about, you can edit Wikipedia. If you edit Wikipedia, people will read your contributions. You have this power right now. You can publish and influence people at scale across the world by developing Wikipedia articles. Beyond believing in yourself, believe in other people in this room. There is a wiki community. Wikipedia belongs to you. Wikipedia belongs to all of us. We set the governance of this Wikipedia platform. We also set the ethics and values. If there's something that we don't like, we can talk about this publicly, make documentation about it, and we can make the world a better place. Donors believe in us. I showed you that annual report where it claimed millions of donors. Those donations are because of the trust that the public has in the Wikipedia community's ethics and the governance process. Those donations are for the community. They belong to us. We have significant power. We're not starting with nothing here. Believe in our position. Wikipedia is the most influential media platform in the world. Again, debatable, but if we're not the most influential, we're very influential. We have $1 billion. Wikipedia is pulling in between $150 and $200 million a year. This is not a scrappy organization. And I know tens of millions of dollars, they can't solve all the problems in the world, but we're much better off than many other people. We're not at zero resources. We have a couple 100,000 active editors in any given month. This is a very diverse community all over the world. And we can claim seats in policymaking discussions at every level, whether city government, state government, national government, international. I'll tell you one of the seats that we have that's developed in the past couple of years. There's a European Union law. You can read this Wikipedia article. It's called the Digital Services Act. It's a regulation on all the big tech platforms. It talks about AI continuously in this law and in the code of this law. And in the Digital Services Act, the European Union named the tech platforms that are stakeholders in this act, called them out, specifically regulated them. And here's the list of them. There's some familiar faces, of course, Amazon, Apple, so we get Google is in there. Wikipedia is on this list. When there is law made in the European Union, it cannot be made without comment from Wikipedia. At the highest level of the European Union, we are a stakeholder in this, and we can assert our ethics and values in the lawmaking. This is the case in the European Union. This is the case in America. This is the case in every country. We are a major tech platform, and we can take advantage of that position. We can also take advantage of this in Columbia University's policy. If someone wants to talk about university ethics, you can do it at the low level. You can do it at your nonprofit level, your community level. You can do it at the global level. There is so much power here in Wikipedia that you can assert. We have leadership in setting ethics. We can't always change the law. I'm not promising that we can outmaneuver Google's lawyers, but we can always define ethics and we can say what's right and what's wrong. You can join Wikipedia to speak for democracy. I'm going to give some examples of social and ethical problems. I'm going to not pass judgment about these things, but I'm going to say where there's some conflicts, where there's room for debate. So there's this program called Wikimedia Enterprise. And through the Wikimedia Enterprise, the Wikimedia Foundation sold access to data in Google. This is kind of a straw man argument, but I'm just going to say, I think that the Wikimedia Foundation, when they were describing this project, they said, we're selling access to Google. and there's no social implications behind this. I feel like they didn't really discuss the implications or ethics or social values to this. The Wikimedia Foundation asserted the selling of this data to be controversial. I don't think data ever got sold in this program. What I think really got sold in this program was that Google says that they have ethical approval to use Wikipedia's data when they purchase the data. So Google didn't exactly buy ethics and friendship and camaraderie from the Wikimedia Foundation, but as soon as we sold them the data, Google got an invitation to present at our last International Wikipedia conference. We're not accustomed to having tech companies at our conferences. It's been a scrappy community conference in the past. And now there's people from Google walking around in our midst, telling community what the value should be and asserting that it's ethical for a company like Google to slurp up the entirety of Wikipedia and do whatever they want to do with it. I'm not arguing that it's legal for them to do this, but I never believed that it was ethical for them to do this in the way that they're doing it, the kind of remixing of Wikipedia's data that they're doing. I think that's debatable, and I think we should talk more about these kind of things. This is where I'm talking about setting ethics and values. Okay, different subject. I'm going to talk about communities that have asserted rights that are not legal rights, but that are ethical rights. And I think we can assert ethical rights too. So indigenous rights, I'm talking about global activism among indigenous communities around the world, every country, so many different ways. Vulnerable communities, they require special concession, not always legal concession, ethical concession for these minorities. And there's different declarations. There's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. In America, there's the American Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. These are manifestos. These are saying assertions that these rights exist. And there's something called the CARE principles for indigenous data governance. What some of these assert, especially these indigenous data governance principles, is that if you're going to be talking about these communities, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you're going to be talking about these communities, you need to get the support and permission of these communities. You cannot be talking about them without including them in the conversation. And when Google sets up Wikipedia and they make all kinds of decisions about ethics and values, they are doing this without the Wiki community. And this is happening in the European Union as well. You cannot be making decisions about the people without including community groups in these things. I'm going to give you another example of a community that asserts its ethics. And I'm watching the time here. I'm at 12 minutes. I need to wrap it up. Consider the furries. So I'm talking about people who wear animal costumes in events and online. So this is a demographic, and I'm telling you that this demographic, whatever they're up to, they assert their rights as best they can, and I'm going to show you exactly how. So this is a CODA. It's something comparable to something called a Creative Commons license. It's an ethical guide for the furry community to say, if someone makes a cartoon character of an animal figure, under what circumstances can you reuse this cartoon character? Now, I'm going to call out 3 of the regulations that they assert. And again, this isn't a legal assertion of rights, but this is an ethical assertion of rights. They give permission. If somebody has made a furry cartoon, are you allowed to show this character in romance? Yes or no? Some people say they don't want their characters reused in this way. Can you use the furry character in a violent video game or comic? Some people say, I made this character for peace and love. I don't want any violence associated with it. Can you put politics in the mouth of these characters? These are not legal regulations, but I'm just saying that community groups can get together, and even without lawyers, they can say, you can reuse their content in this way and it's ethical. Don't reuse it in this way. It's not ethical. It may be legal for tech to slurp up all of Wikipedia and furry pics to use in AI, but only people and not corporations decide what is ethical. If you do not see yourself represented, then you better represent yourself. If you don't, then an AI will speak on your behalf. Thank you so much. My name is Rasberry. Fight for democracy.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, Amir, you want to be interested? Or Isaac, you want to go, Isaac? Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Isaac Johnson. I'm a research scientist, senior research scientist at the Wikimedia Foundation. In that role, I do a number of things, but in regards to this conversation, I'm involved with a lot of the developing of some of the AI models that we're deploying to do things like try to assist editors in various editing processes, helping with a variety of kind of curational tasks around the wiki. So I'm involved and kind of have some firsthand knowledge of a lot of that work that is going on. Also involved in thinking through, as we enter in this kind of generative AI era, if you will, like how do we think about, and how do we guard against some of the harms that can come out of these models, and thinking through what are our processes for that. Just to give maybe a quick overview of some of the things I think that are on my mind as I think about this kind of AI future and what are we dealing with here. I think maybe on the positive side. So in the last year, I think I definitely went from a space of like, okay, these tools, like, yeah, they can do a lot of things, but they're kind of unconstrained. Like they don't really have clear goals, like not a very good fit, right? To understanding as I talk with more and more folks that, hey, this actually does provide an avenue through which editors with like hyper-specific tasks, or there's all sorts of areas where like as a team, for instance, we just don't have the resources to support all these different needs. And some of these large models can. And so understanding that, hey, there's some benefits that could be had from out of here. And so thinking about then how do we help try to push these models towards a world in which they can actually be more helpful. So right now we get a fair bit of alignment, I would say, for free, like not for free, actually, we've quite earned it, right? Like these companies are training models on Wikipedia content. As a result, they have like good topical understandings. You get certain things like, oh, the models seem to be able to handle wiki text fairly well. Like it makes them kind of out of the box useful for certain types of tasks. But I think moving forward, we have to think a little more, maybe in a little more opinionated way of like, what do we actually, if we want these models to be helpful for Wikimedians, like what should they be capable of doing without, a lot of additional guidance? So thinking about those sorts of, how do we put together our benchmarks, or like, what are our expectations for these models? So I've been doing a fair bit of thinking in that kind of alignment space. When I think about the like potential side effects that are negative from these models within Wikimedia, I mean, is potential downsides of these models obviously go far beyond just Wikipedia. But thinking about like hallucination, misinformation, the opportunities they might have for kind of interjecting more of that within the projects. I actually think less about AI, and I think more about some of our core challenges on, things like how do we do a better job of helping editors work with sources and understand where sources are, thinking about like OCR, the gaps in knowledge in these tools, and thinking about like, okay, like how do projects like Wikisource help to expand the sort of knowledge that is available? And so I think I often return to some of the kind of core long-standing challenges that that the community has faced. I think I can leave it at that as an overview and make space for Dr.
Thank you. Can you hear me with the mask? Cool. So I want you to think about 3 words as I tell you the story that I'm going to tell you. So texts, time, and talent, right? That's what's needed for you to be a successful Wikipedia editor. So I teach, there we go, talent. So I teach at the Grad Center, and I teach something called Interactive Technology and Pedagogy. And because I teach this class, in 2022, my students and I were already playing with DALL-E, right? And putting some things up in comments. And at some point, towards the end of the semester, one of my students said, "Oh my God, professor, ChatGPT is out. Are you going to try it?" And I'm like, dude, I'm grading papers. I'm sorry. It's not happening, at least until, the end of the year. So the end of the year comes around. I start, playing with ChatGPT, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm an English teacher. So you can imagine that for me, I was like, okay. And at the same time, I started reading, about how people are using the technology, and the story that really stuck, as I was reading all the different things. And by the way, I'm an expert by now. I've dedicated all of 2023 to use all the tools. Like you asked me, I've read everything. But the one that stuck with me was very early on. There was this contractor who was dyslexic, and he was putting together a project for a British engineer who happened to have access to GPT early on. So he was one of the beta testers. So at some point he was talking to, the contractor was talking to the engineer, saying that, he's a very talented contractor, but because of his dyslexia, he has trouble communicating, with his clients and, getting good jobs, and so on and so forth. So the British engineer is like, oh, grabbed Zapier, right? Wrote a little program. And basically what he did is he connected a new Gmail for the contractor that would grab whatever message he was trying to write in, a dyslexic way, and then take it to GPT, and GPT would write this gorgeous, hello, customer, thank you for your, request of blah, blah, blah. So when I read that, I immediately, as an educator, sat down and I thought, oh my God, this totally could level the field. Because I happen to teach at a community college where I have a lot of English as a foreign language students or students with some, basic writing issues. And I'm thinking, is it possible that this tool could actually help my students advance in life, like the contractor, like the situation of the contractor? But that was the end of that story, because immediately we, started the story of, oh my God, the students are going to cheat. Oh my God, these tools are ruining the environment. Oh my God, the tools are biased. And let me say something that's really important to me. Oh my God, these tools omit stuff, because, one thing is to have bias. Do you see the bias? You understand the bias? Harder it is when they're omitting information and you don't know they're omitting information because you're not an expert on the subject. So you can't tell that they're omitting information, right? So that's a big one for me. So, all of the bad things that you probably have heard from, all of us and the news, right? All of the bad things about the tools kind of took over, and I spent 2023, between trying to convince my colleagues that it wasn't just, good for cheating, but, maybe we could do something with it, and learning about, all of the problems, and also experimenting in class with my students and getting their feedback, yada, yada. So at this moment, 2024, what I would like to do after all the knowledge that I've gained, by reading, by experimenting, and I've used them all, Claude, Bard, you name them, right? I would like to go back to that moment where I had that realization that this could actually help certain types of people, and start experimenting with that. So for me, the future, I know all of the bad things, and I think they're incredibly important. And ergo, part of my job is I'm literally now creating training for my colleagues so that they become aware, basically critical AI literacy, right? So they become aware of what are these bots, how do they work, what are the problems, all of that. So they can pass that information on to the students, right? But beyond that very important work, right, of dealing with all the bad, I really want to go back to that first moment and start thinking with others, what are the possible things that we could do to help, with these tools to help level the field? Because like I said, text, time, and talent. So some of my students could actually write or, help write pretty good Wikipedia articles, but they're not quite there because, like that contractor, maybe the language is not that good. But maybe they know how they can read the things, so maybe the bot could help with the talent. Maybe not. I don't know, because I haven't tried, because I was looking at all the bad stuff, right? So here's where I stand. And there's tons of more things, but, time to pass on the baton.
Hi, Amir. Hi, my name is Amir. Thanks a lot to Wikimedia NYC for inviting me to the event and to the panel, even though I'm totally not an AI expert, not even close to that. I have been involved in Wikipedia for almost 20 years as an editor. One of the main things in which I'm involved is localization, and making sure that the Wikipedia and related projects are usable in as many languages as possible, with the localization of the user interface and the translation of the content. I will try to say a few things about that. How do these things related to actual human creation, human writing, and how they may be related to AI in ways that, in the last year or so, AI has been discussed a lot in the press. So I'm not a press person, and I'm not as a tech person, I'm not involved in AI directly. I'm involved in other areas, but nevertheless, so these things are not discussed much. So what things, for example, first, I don't actually like using the term AI very much. Like AI, like this term for several decades, it has been stuck to all kinds of different unrelated technologies. The one AI technology that is discussed a lot in the last year is LLMs, large language models. So let's call them language models, which is what they are. It's not necessarily intelligence. Are they useful? So one very common example of what they are useful for is writing cover letters for, like, when you apply for a job. And so here in the US, I only moved to the US a few months ago. Before that, I lived in Israel and in Russia. And in Israel, you don't have to write a cover letter when you apply for a job. And I've heard that there are services in the US that help people write cover letters, and they are concerned that they will go out of business because of large language models. And I am wondering, oh, maybe cover letters are not necessary in the first place. Maybe that's the thing that large language models are helping us understand. Maybe just like if it's so easy for a machine to write them, maybe then just not necessary. Maybe just, talk to people naturally. So that's just one idea. And another thing that is often labeled as AI, and maybe you don't need to label it as AI. So people are saying that AI is actually useful in provable ways for medical research. So two examples I heard about recently. So one, like literally yesterday, I heard that some very innovative drugs developed using AI. So people can do testing on new things much faster, which is great. And then they actually tested and they are found to be good drugs. So great. So call it machine learning driven drug testing technology. Why call it artificial intelligence? I'm not sure. Another thing, my wife happens to work on developing new kinds of medical equipment, which helps disabled people to communicate. They cannot communicate, they cannot speak because of their illnesses, and they use some machine learning based technology that helps people communicate. Fine, call it like medical equipment with machine learning. Why call it intelligence? The intelligence is still human eventually. So that's about the terminology. Some other ideas I thought about what language models actually are useful for. So there's a huge debate in Wikipedia in all languages. Is language model output actually useful for writing articles? I tend to be on the side that it's probably not that useful for writing articles because of the hallucinations, which may be fixed someday, or maybe not. But if it's so, again, like with cover letters, if it's so easy to generate so much text, maybe it shouldn't be generated at all. Maybe you could just write it much shorter and humans will understand it. What language models actually are useful for, that this is something that, like, just from my personal experience with using ChatGPT, that's the only thing for which I found ChatGPT to be useful. And I heard a similar opinion from Emily Berman, who is a very famous AI researcher and writer about this. Look her up; she's amazing. Using it like as a reverse search engine. So very often people use search engines most of the time. They type a few words and then they find information about these words. Sometimes people know about the thing, like what the thing is. They can describe it in a lot of words, but they don't know the name. So for that, I found ChatGPT actually useful. Like I used it many times to write something long, like the name of an event or a phenomenon, and find what its name is. For that, ChatGPT is definitely useful. Other language models probably too. How could that be integrated better into Wikipedia editing? I'm not sure, but that's a thing for which it is actually useful. Machine translation, one obvious example. Again, I prefer not to call it AI. It's machine translation, as long as it's actually used by responsible people who actually check all the mistakes that machine translation tends to make and correct them. Then machine translation is actually useful. You don't have to call it intelligence. It's machine translation. Finally, one thing for which language models, like all the language models I tried until now, were not able to do this. And I'm really surprised that pretty much nobody is speaking about this. But ChatGPT is the famous example. It's only a language model. It is not a database. I mean, I guess that maybe somewhere deep inside they use some kind of a database for storing the data. But it doesn't actually have data, which is why it will very often make mistakes about facts that would be really easy to find in a database. because it's not really a database. It prefers to just, I mean, it doesn't prefer, like that's the only thing it can do. It cannot access a database like a very old relational database with tables. I'm not familiar, if any of you are, please tell me, but I'm not familiar with any language model that has access to a real database and can reliably, like it is actually smart enough to write pretty decent SQL queries, but it cannot run them against any databases. If anybody develops one, this will actually make language models more useful. Maybe it will even make them more useful for Wikipedians to write better articles and find data more easily. The first company that does this will actually make language models much more useful. But this also means, and this is really the last thing I'm going to say, I won't mention which company told it to me. But one company, I was talking to them about some stuff in Wikipedia. They told me that it's actually possible that they will show different information to people who look for information in different languages, even though it's the same piece of information. It will show them different output depending on the language they search for, not because of any like particular politics or because like any government asks for something different or any like groups of people ask for something different, because they get this information from Wikipedia, and information in Wikipedia in different languages may be different. It's not forced to be the same. Wikidata, which may be familiar to some Wikipedians, that's where the data is the same. The translations of the labels are different, but the data itself is the same. But apparently, for some reason, they didn't want to use Wikidata. They preferred to use Wikipedia in the language, which is really weird to me, because I would think that tables and abstract structured data is much more natural for computers, and text is much more natural for humans. But apparently, we're moving into a world in which it goes the other way around, which is really weird, but that's what I keep hearing. So I will leave you with that. These are my thoughts about the relationship of Wikipedia and AI, and to just a short follow-up what Lane said in the beginning. So you said, yeah, keep democracy alive. Stick to democracy. Yes, that's important. Democracy, I would go in further. Like, democracy is a good idea for groups of humans, large groups of humans, and I would say even like stay human. AI is not human. AI is kind of occasionally pretends to be human, not very well, but humans are humans. Nobody else is humans. Only humans are humans. So stay human.
Do you have questions? No questions. I think you have to turn it off.
My question was, thank you all. First of all, it's very interesting. My question was about the future of Wikipedia and AI, and if you all see potentially that folks will maybe start going to these large language models before, when the trend is maybe to go to Wikipedia now, but do you see that being some competition? And is there any potential plans for Wikipedia to, or what do you think of them having some type of large language model themselves? So yeah, that was my question.
So, hello, I can get us started with that, and then obviously you guys have, yeah, I'm sure have something to say. But as you know, Google Labs is basically doing the same as Bing. It's creating its own generative answer to any question, right? Before you would get your set of links, but now not only Bing is creating a generative it's a sort of like an overview before you get to the web pages, right? To the links to the web pages. Google is also doing that with its own search. So very, very soon, most of the planet, when they have a query, an AI is going to answer. That's a very dangerous thing, because as we know, the AIs filter the information and they remix it any way they want. And trust me, because I've done this in my class a lot. They omit stuff. They make mistakes. And so actually trusting this overview before the actual links is not a good idea, but because it's the first thing on the page, and I know that everybody is going to start to read that instead of going down the links. So I think this is a huge deal. I think that we're going to have an immense crisis of information literacy for a variety of reasons beyond that one, but this is going to contribute. So, ergo, Wikipedia becomes even more important, not only because we are part of, what the content that we create is part of the data sets for these bots, right? But also because, we're probably going to be the only ones that are actually saying something factual as opposed to the rest of the web, particularly the bots. So the future of search and of truth doesn't look very good. And ergo, I think Wikipedia should get better and better. And I personally think we should be asking for more respect from the rest of the, online community. So, having said that, what do you think, Ben?
Sure, I can. I think in many ways I'm going to say a lot of the things you said, maybe with different words. I mean, I think the things that come to mind is this isn't new. So obviously we've been working for a while. There, search technology changes, people push back, and so this is just another kind of layer in that. But I think, yeah, it points to the importance of reliability, all the hallucinations, misinformation, and it doesn't mean people are always going to come to Wikipedia, but I think in many ways it makes clear the value of Wikipedia to a lot of people, and I don't see AI really replace the ability to curate sources and determine what is reliable and what is not a thing that I see as kind of replaceable. And a task that AIs are in that they can learn to do. Essentially, it's just a very, very difficult thing, a very human thing, and so that gives me a lot of hope. But I think the thing that remains incredibly important through all this is the attribution, right? And that is the piece that is really important to push for in these things. We want people to get access to good knowledge, but it's important that they understand where it comes from. In the same way, that verifiability on Wikipedia, I think, attribution and pushing for that generally is kind of the right approach.
I just, this is like a huge question that AI, who's gonna regulate it? Nobody's gonna regulate it. And I just did what we all do is I put it in Wikipedia, various things like, policing AI or sort of safe AI, etc., etc. And what came out, it's this predictive policing in Wikipedia. And interestingly, it says artificial intelligence can be used to minimize crime by addressing the unidentified demands, and then it has got Rand Corporation and history and whatnot. So my question in general to this world is that, we know already that there are amazing amount of fake IDs which are creating fake information, disinformation, misinformation, and which is causing conflicts, democracy, elections, everything is, because of these fake IDs. So who is gonna, purge these fake IDs? Who is gonna, sort of create real universal IDs? And then, in this whole ecosystem, we already have lawsuits, New York Times suing, etc. But who is gonna actually do the, that framework and what it will look like?
I'll say something about this. Other people will have other things. Couple of answers. One, we can depend on the law, the government of different countries to do this. I think that the law is ill-equipped to meet the needs of the people. The law is not reflective of what typical people expect or think is right or wrong with AI. The law has a source. Law comes from somewhere. And I think Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, these are organizations with lobbyists. I would say to a disproportionate extent, they write the law. So in lots of ways, the law that comes into our governments that we expect, if it's the law, we think we might expect this comes from the people, this comes from the citizens, this must be what the people want. But in fact, I think the law is too often coming from corporations, and it's written in ways that benefit them. The example I gave with Wikimedia Enterprise, I think that Google had many lawyers, dozens of lawyers that already had plans and ethics and expectations about what they would do if they had fast access to Wikipedia data. And we in the wiki community, we cannot crowdsource the labor of 10 full-time lawyers and all the ethicists that Google is able to hire on hand to think through every implication of every single thing that somebody does when they want to interact with their data. It's just competing with $1 trillion. It's very difficult to crowdsource meaningful competition to what you can get with $1 trillion. I think trying to compete on the legal level is difficult. Ultimately, I wish that we could, but the most modest start that I can think to do things is what I said, to have small groups of people, including in rooms like this, or even smaller, just talk among your friends and say, I feel that this is ethical, or I feel that this is unethical. You don't have to think through every single aspect of it, and you don't have to be heard by everybody. Do whatever you can to document your positions. But if somehow you can get a group of people to say, we think this is unethical, we think this is unethical. I know this is modest, and I know ethics aren't enforced by law, but we have to begin somewhere. And that's the best way that I can think that typical people can actually do something in response to these, even though it's very modest.
And this is all good, that we all pool together and we do good. But on the other hand, we have like these bots, which will create, 5 million fake IDs on, 500 different media platforms, whether that's Instagram or TikTok or Likey or, in many countries, these platforms which we have not even heard about. So there's a enormous churning of misinformation and disinformation. So even before we go to AI, we have to deal with that. And then, just like if you have a car, there's a license plate number around the world. If you have an address, office, there is a physical address. How are we able to continue to make these fake IDs? Why cannot we have a telephone number, a SIM card attached to every, if there is a terrorist or, misogynist or, whomsoever, somebody is like making these misinformation, disinformation, this is happening at a massive scale. Like we cannot deal with this, by, so first of all, like, I think there has to be something real ID, like a universal ID, just like a simple phone number, which is associated, you can hide your ID, you can create a different ID, but it has to be attached to a real phone number or something. So this way, what would happen is like, this is one way, this, which I think, so.
So this session is formally at its end. Does one of the panelists want to have a last word, either commenting on that or to leave us with a thought?
I'll say after the session, I'm happy to talk with anyone about IDs. Wikipedia has made a million IDs, millions of IDs for millions of people. And we encounter many social and ethical issues in the course of doing this.
If I can say one thing, I think we've forgotten that we do reach a bazillion amount of people. Like if one day we really wanted to change something, we could put a big banner and they would read it. Or we could go dark a couple of days, and trust me, people would notice that. So we do have that power. We do reach a lot of people. And so if we made a decision about something, we could just do it. We did it with SOPA. I don't know if you remember SOPA when, several companies on the internet didn't want Congress to pass something and they got together, and the internet was dark for a day. I mean, we don't need to, pair with Google to do that, but we can do it on our own. We have enough clout. So if we want something changed, we have power. As I think that the most important thing about what Lane is saying is we do have power. We just don't realize that we have. So that would be my last word.
All right. Thank you very much to the panelists.
Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Make sure you grab some stickers that are floating around. My name is Kevin Payravi. I go by user Super Hamster. I chose my username when I was 12 years old. Been a Wikipedian since 2007. And I'm joined with Jennifer 8 Lee. Yes, her middle name is actually 8. What do you want to say about yourself?
I'm going to say that you forgot the dot after the 8, which is a decimal point, actually, but we'll correct it in the next time. But in a more serious light, what do I do? I raise money. I'm a money person with a lot of stuff to do with credibility. And I'm on the board of Hacks Hackers, which actually runs a project called, or helps run a project called WikiCred in conjunction with Wikimedia DC mostly. And I'm, as a fun fact, I'm on the Unicode emoji subcommittee. So I help regulate the emoji that are on your phone. So that's my like fun fact. But anyway.
Yeah, so we're just going to begin with a quick overview of like verifiability and reliable sources on Wikipedia. If you're a Wikipedia editor, this should be pretty familiar to you. If you're not a Wikipedia editor, hopefully this is kind of a quick, good overview for you. Wikipedia is based on reliable published sources. People always ask, how do you know Wikipedia is reliable? The answer is you check the sources, where the information is coming from. And we have a bunch of policy pages related to this. So if you go to Wikipedia and type in WP:RS, that's a good starting point to kind of learn about reliable sources on Wikipedia. And one of the favorite ways I like to introduce reliable sources is Wikipedia's perennial sources list. And this is basically a huge table of hundreds of entries that describes how the English Wikipedia community views sources. Wikipedia editors are always discussing sources, whether or not they're reliable, what context certain sources might be reliable. And based on these discussions, we kind of develop consensus. And from this consensus, we are able to produce this table. So in this image you see here, you can see, for example, Press TV is considered to be unreliable, being like an Iranian government propaganda outlet. Pry.com is considered marginally reliable. Project Veritas has been deprecated on a spam blacklist, while ProPublica is generally considered reliable. Really fascinating page to kind of dig through. And English Wikipedia is not the only version of Wikipedia with this list. About a dozen other language Wikipedia versions also have their own perennial sources lists.
Yeah. And then I just want to say, as someone who came into this sort of on a later side, the name is very confusing because perennial sources does not mean they are perennially reliable. It means that they're generally perennially debated. And this when you're trying to explain to funders is very confusing. Okay.
And something I like to highlight is how sources change over time. There's kind of the sad story of CNET. CNET's been like a site that I always used as a kid growing up, learning about like PC news and PC gaming news. Prior to 2020, CNET was considered to be generally reliable related to technology until Red Ventures acquired them in October 2020. Once Red Ventures acquired them, they deleted thousands of old CNET articles, and the only way we can now access them is through the Internet Archive, through the Wayback Machine. From October 2020 to November 2022, Wikipedia community considers CNET to be marginally reliable because Red Ventures acquisition resulted in a kind of a deterioration of editorial standards. And then what's interesting is starting in November 2022, with like the rise of ChatGPT and LLMs, CNET started publishing articles using AI. These articles had very limited or no fact checking. They were riddled with factual errors, and they didn't disclose they were using AI. They just kind of attributed the article to, quote, CNET money staff. So once this happened and it was exposed, the Wikipedia community now considers CNET to be unreliable for usage on Wikipedia. So it's kind of a sad tale of the downfall of Wikipedia, or of CNET through Wikipedia's eyes. And then reliability is also context dependent. So there are several sources that we consider reliable or unreliable on certain topic areas. So the Huffington Post, for example, we consider reliable for topics not related to politics. while politics are considered marginally reliable. And then the HuffPost also has a contributor section where kind of like the public can kind of create articles, and we consider those to be generally unreliable. Similar vein, Fox News, news excluding politics and science is considered marginally reliable, or there's no consensus there, but it is considered generally unreliable related to politics and science. And of course, their talk shows as well. So context is important. Lots of wiki projects also have their own lists of sources. Wiki Project Video Games has a list of generally reliable sources for gaming. Film has one, Korea has one. Very interestingly, Christian music has their own list of reliable and unreliable sources. So there's a lot of interesting lists that you can kind of trawl through to see topic-specific source listings. You want to talk about WikiCrit?
Yes. So there, let me see how do I say it? So I've been through parts of my life been working on the issues of credibility and misinformation since basically after the 2016 elections, and starting in 2018 Kevin showed up at a hackathon that we read. That this is fun actually. We used to have these conferences called MisinfoCons, and we still do. But then Facebook funded one, and the MisinfoCon logo is actually one of the most amazing logos I've ever worked on. It is half in English, and the mirror half of it is in Cyrillic. So it says MisinfoCon in Cyrillic. So Facebook, now Meta, wanted to fund one of these conferences. They're like, we can't fund a conference where the logo is half in Cyrillic, right? Because this is after all of like the Russian misinformation and all of that. So we called it CredCon, which is sort of like, which is very Silicon Valley, because everything in Silicon Valley is like named the opposite of what you deal with. Like the trust and safety team is dealing with everything that is not trustworthy or safe. And then things like customer success is always dealing with people who are not successful, right? So CredCon was a hackathon that we did in Austin, and Andrew Lee, who many of you guys know, I guess suggested to Kevin that he drive up from Dallas, and he shows up. And at that point, I think the foundation had decided not to fund WikiCred, had decided not to fund WikiConference 2019, I think it was. And he was really sad, or he was really sad. He was really sad. And I was like, why are you sad? And he's like, because we just found out we're not going to get money from the foundation. And I was like, what's the budget for your conference? He's like 50,000. And I was like, if you make this conference about credibility, I can find you 50,000. So we found 135,000, and we did a great conference around credibility in 2019 at MIT. And from that entire sort of a larger initiative of the role that Wikipedia can play in credibility on the internet as a whole was born, because I do sort of the thesis there was that Wikipedia is one of the very few places where you can scale information reliability, in a sort of systematic infrastructure way, right? There's a lot of fact checking, love the fact checkers, whatever, but they're, on a good day, you can do maybe like 10 fact checks, as an individual. So you need some kind of more systemic reliability. And because of the way that the players on the internet, either Apple or Google, depend on Wikipedia, if you make things there more reliable, then we can have an impact on the internet at scale. So among the different things that WikiCred, which is our initiative, have done, obviously we kind of helped with the 2019 conference. We've given out credibility grants, sort of initiatives up to 10,000. We've gotten funding from the foundation itself, Craig Newmark, of which many things in journalism are named after. And we've worked very closely, obviously, with Hacks Hackers, Wikimedia DC, and apparently Wikimedia New England, which I did not know until I saw the slide. Surprise! Yeah.
So I'll just be going over kind of some of the projects that the WikiCred initiative has kind of helped fund and support over the last few years. First one I'll touch on is called the Vaccine Safety Project, which exists on Wikipedia. If you go to WP:/VSafe. This was a project which was ran by Netta, which many of you know. She basically compiled kind of like the perennial sources list, a list of sources that are considered reliable for vaccine safety. And this was all like during the pandemic, right? So vaccine safety was like a very hot topic, and there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. So kind of a list of what's considered reliable and unreliable, again, in the Wikipedia context. So very cool project. It's worth checking out. Another one is actually a tool I developed called Sight Unseen.
At the hackathon you showed up at.
At the hackathon I showed up at, yeah, in 2018. This user-scripted adds little icons to citations to kind of denote their nature. So whether something is an opinion piece and from an advocacy group, a news source, a blog, social media, etc. The idea is to kind of give you a quick glance of what the nature of the sources being cited are. Context does matter. So like you should never look at an icon and be like, oh, this is a bad source or a good source, but it's just there to kind of provide extra context. My favorite example is the first one, which is where an article from the San Antonio Express News is marked as an opinion piece. Oftentimes you might see an article come from the New York Times or Washington Post, and you go, oh, that must be a news source, but it actually is an opinion piece. It's kind of good to get that context up front. And there's also a bunch of other citation annotating scripts out there. Headbomb has his own unreliable source script that's really good.
Predatory.
Yeah, his script does good at marking predatory journals. So that's also worth checking out. WikiCredBot. Do you want to talk about this one?
No.
Okay, cool. Another project that's very recent that WikiCred's working on is called WikiCredBot. So one kind of perennial issue on Wikipedia is there's no good structured database of sources. Even the perennial sources list we looked at.
Good. There's no structured database sources except for a spam list.
Even the perennial sources list we looked at, that's just a big HTML table, right? It's not like a JSON.
It's on a doc page.
Yeah. There's no good structuring of that. So what we're working on is a bot called WikiCredBot. And the idea is for each wiki project, we'll kind of come up with the list of known sources that are good, known sources that are bad, based on the perennial sources list, as well as sources that that project considers to be reliable or unreliable. And once we kind of have that structuring of data in place, we can run this bot, which will generate reports. It'll say when articles underneath that wiki project are citing sources that are considered not good. It'll kind of flag them so that editors can go in and review those sources. And you can also see articles that are citing good sources. So far, we've just enabled this bot for the Vaccine Safety Project, which we just kind of covered. But we're hoping to get this going for other wiki projects as well. You can kind of see the stats that this bot is able to generate. Still very new, right? Only 3% of sources identified are known reliable sources. But over time, we hope this kind of data set can grow and this tool becomes more and more useful. WikiCite is also a project worth knowing about. This is a very long-term and ongoing effort, kind of in the same line to kind of structure citations and the data behind citations. So for example, what WikiCite has led to is data for millions of academic works and journals has been imported into Wikidata. You can now on Wikipedia actually use a template to cite a journal that will pull data from Wikidata. So kind of having this structured data that can be reused across all the Wikipedias and remain consistent is pretty valuable. And there's a bunch of tooling they've also developed for helping improve Wikidata entries. So it's a project worth knowing about and following. If you want to learn more, you can go to the MetaWiki and look up WikiCite. Another cool project called iffy.news. It's not directly underneath Wikipedia. It's like an external project, but they're kind of working on this idea of structured citation data as well by listing unreliable and fake news websites. And WikiCred provided them funding to actually kind of import Wikipedia data into their database. And it's just a really cool tool to kind of see hundreds, if not thousands, of classifications of what's considered, fake news, unreliable, reliable, and so on. So it's another cool project worth checking out.
Yeah, and also this is sort of interesting. So before he imported data from Wikipedia, he was just some dude basically doing his own kind of evaluations of how reliable some sources were. And there's some that are like maybe they've gotten a publicity that there is some consensus like Sputnik or RT or whatnot, but it was just one dude. So there is some value because of the consensus-driven processes in judging on Wikipedia that is valuable to the internet at large. So Google, whenever we have conversations with them about some of the structuring the databases of the domains, always pushes back I mean, it's very fascinating. Like, how many people judge? Like, what is a universe of people, who are participating in the judging? Like, is there a bias? So it's sort of it's very interesting because on some level, it's also I think it's kind of like the best we got. Though there's some commercial services, obviously, that do something similar, but I do think that it is better when it's an open discussion for how different things are assessed by the Wikipedian community.
Yeah, it's always funny linking to these discussions about reliable sources, and you've got comments by people named like Super Hamster and Head Bomb and like all these silly usernames, but they're having very serious discussions about what is and is not a good source. Last thing we'll touch on is just AI, because why not? That's what everyone's talking about these days.
We didn't know that much about it, but we felt we were remiss not to have a slide that said AI at a Wikipedia conference.
So AI, of course, it's been a hot topic in the Wikipedia universe. Like, should we use AI? Is AI a threat to Wikipedia, and so on? And it's quite interesting because, of course, a lot of these LLMs like ChatGPT have been trained on Wikipedia. A very significant portion of them use Wikipedia text.
I will also say, so the two largest corpuses of text that the GPT universe has been trained on, one is Wikipedia. Do you guys know what the other one is? It's Reddit. So so given the choice between LLMs being shaped by Reddit or Wikipedia, I do prefer Wikipedia, but it's sort of just interesting to know that those were the largest sort of inbound in the original source. Obviously now Reddit has sort of quasi negotiating with the large LLM providers to license their data. So Wikipedia still remains much more open. But that is something to keep in mind when you hear like the kind of tone of ChatGPT returning something back to you, because it is often Wikipedia or Reddit.
And then, yeah, just kind of the whole thing about, is LLM a threat to Wikipedia, as more and more people turn to LLMs. And like, Google is experimenting with, when you do a Google search, they'll try to auto-generate an LLM response at the top. And that will, of course, kind of drive traffic away from Wikipedia, which kind of reminds me of the fear we had maybe 10 years ago or so when Google introduced the knowledge graph, which is that little box in the top right of Google searches that kind of has a little blurb from Wikipedia, has images, has basic information. The fear then was, would that drive traffic away from Wikipedia and lead to its downfall? Which it did not. But we're kind of looking at that question again in the context of LLMs. But LLMs, of course, as we've all seen, hallucinate information. They don't provide sources. There has been some experimentation. I know Google's LLM, they kind of generate their text and then they'll kind of go back and try to find sources that match the text they generated and link to those as sources. How much actual fact checking that is, probably not too much. So there's like some experimentation in that realm, but ultimately the data you're getting from an LLM is not coming from a specific source. It's just generated text. While Wikipedia, on the other hand, of course, is sourced. Every statement on Wikipedia should have a source. And another interesting point is the context of LLMs collapsing. If an LLM is trained on its own data, so as more and more LLM text is added to the web, if LLMs like ChatGPT start grabbing that information that it itself generated, it leads to what's kind of known as a collapse, where the quality of the generated text just takes a huge nosedive, which is something that OpenAI and other institutions have to kind of watch out for and figure out how to solve. Wikipedia does not have that problem. Of course, Wikipedia might sometimes accidentally cite itself, accidentally, inadvertently, but not to that same scale. So, boop. Yeah, that's pretty much it for our presentation. We kind of want to open up the floor, I think, now to just kind of hear your thoughts. Are people working on very interesting projects related to reliable sources, or if you have questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you introduce yourself as you speak?
Yeah. There's a new company out called Ad Fontes Media that rates news sources according to left and right bias and reliability. If anybody would care to take a look at that article, there appears to be some Wikipedians that do not want me to update it, and I could use some help. So
interesting. That they don't want you to update the article about ad.
Wikipedia article on Ad Fontes Media.
That's
The
interesting.
reason is they're saying Ad Fontes is not a reliable source, but it's based
Yeah.
on conversations about the way Ad Fontes was
I could see that,
5
yeah.
years ago. So that needs a little attention.
Yeah, so I am familiar with this site. This has been kind of very popular in terms of like ranking sites on the reliability and bias.
Yeah, more bias, I would say, than.
Yeah. Wait, like as you said, the perennial sources list currently lists Ad Fontes, at least from the community's perspective, as a generally unreliable source. So,
Well,
yeah,
I feel like,
got to open up another discussion.
yeah.
Yeah, it looks like the last discussion was in 2021. Yeah. Roy?
We talked about training on Wikipedia. Do you know if that's with language Wikipedia or
Don't
they
think-
train on others?
My understanding is it's not exclusively English language. So the question is about whether or not the large language models are only training on English language Wikipedia or other languages. My understanding is it is not just English language Wikipedia, but obviously the English language Wikipedia is the most robust and yada, 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 yada. So I don't know, like, Uzbek, I don't even know, like, is, how robust, obviously that is. And then I also have other thoughts. I mean, we can go for more questions, but I can also like stand here and pontificate on all the things that I think that the foundation can do to help us with some of these issues. But let's do some more questions also.
Yeah, I was thinking with that, just look at the site and see, great tool.
It's a great tool. Yeah, I feel like more people
Yeah,
should use this tool.
go further with that, we might put something in a community wish list survey for this. You know how now, when you're typing it, when you're editing it, and you type in something that leads to this kind of big linking page, and it gives you the links to fix it, but what if in the future we could have a little pop-up box say, you would use X, which may be an unreliable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Can I
Yes, go
fucking get into, okay. So this is my Jenny's little fist on the whole situation. So that exactly what you're talking about, which is the foundation, I think the foundation currently is developing a tool, which he's about to pull up on whatever that site is, whenever they talk about whatever tools they're developing. So what's interesting is they are developing something like that, which is, oh, you're citing this thing. Maybe it's a unreliable source, and it's based on my understanding, the same kind of infrastructure that kind of looks at whether or not a site is on a spam blacklist, both universal or in the English language thing. And we remember looking at this and we're like, I mean, that means basically an API. Like, you need a database of the sources that are considered reliable, non-reliable, marginally reliable. And we're like, where the fuck are you getting this database, right? Because the thing is, there is no, I couldn't believe this in the year like 2023, but I checked. There is no structured database of the reliable sources. There is the perennial sources list, but that literally is a talk page that is, there's some effort to be like, well, let's make it into a JSON file, which is at least like semi sort of structured. And that has not existed. So the foundation is kind of building something. You did. What did you make? The JSON. The perennial sources. When did you do that? Recently? Last year. I feel like. Yes. So I think we would like more of that first of all. So that's one. So there's at least a JSON file, and then at least it should like go into some database world so that this tool that the foundation is building can at least talk to something. The other thing that is happening is at least with the enterprise product, which I know there are all kinds of opinions about the foundation charging for, better, more robust access. The top, the kind of clients that care. So like Google, Apple, Microsoft, whatever. Microsoft doesn't pay, by the way. This actually, can I say, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but so something, I'll talk, whatever. it's kind of being streamed. What's kind of interesting is there are some companies where because there's a lot of API access, and then the idea is like, well, how do you make some of the bigger companies pay? So one of the interesting things is you can set a threshold, but above a certain kind of rate access, you should pay, right? And so there's some companies who are like, okay, we want to be good as citizens, we will pay. And there are other companies that are like, oh, this is your rate kind of like access, we'll do that -1. And so they get just underneath, and then they don't pay. So there's a variety of activities in terms of the large big players in the tech space and how they interact with the enterprise product. And what's nice about enterprise is because a lot of the larger players care about the quality of the information, they would also like to see kind of more structured access with regard to the citations and also to the domain reliability. And so our other big wish list that is floating around the community is actually creating a giant master database of all the citations, right? Because right now, one of the problems is if you have a debate on a site on a sort of source on one article page, and like you decide it's not generally reliable, there isn't really a good systemic way to find like whatever the hypothetical 20 other articles that cite that source, and there is sort of like a good reason why you would want to systematically kind of look at the body of citations in the Weverse. That is a very large software product that is beyond the scope of like, I think the volunteer community, but as much as like we want to make noise about it as the community to the foundation, I personally think that's a good thing. I know this is also like a big debate of whether or not Wikidata is scalable enough to handle a lot of the citation data. So I think so it could be, or it could not be, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are perennial sources. There is like one for Christian music. There is one for video games. There is one. So communities actually keep their own perennial sources list, and we think that is a good thing, right? And so whatever kind of structured data format you go and you develop, there's in my view of the world, there is not like one list to rule them all. It is very, very context dependent, and you have to develop a data structure that allows you to say like this domain. The other problem is like we only can right now evaluate things on a domain level, which is problematic when you're thinking like the domain that you're looking at is YouTube, right? So is this video reliable, or if it's come from the BBC, is that reliable? Obviously, it can vary significantly depending on like the sort of account within a platform. So this is something that we're all very aware of. And then also, as we noted, even domains across time and across topics vary in reliability according to the Wikipedian consensus.
And I do want to go back to what you were talking about, Daniel. So there was a request last year kind of along the lines of what you were saying, which is to kind of warn when people are adding a link on a spam blacklist. So instead of the user using that link and then going to save the page and then getting blocked, have a more proactive warning as they're doing it. So that actually is currently in progress by the foundation, I believe. And they'll start with spam blacklist, but there's a lot of potential for that to kind of grow to support other lists of links that aren't just the spam blacklist. So the good news is there is some progress being made there in that space.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think more noise is good along this front, obviously.
Those are very good thoughts, and I wish I knew the answer. You want to go for it?
I mean, I can say something. The perennial sources list is, so the idea is like looking at the pattern of perennial sources, what can we tell over time, based on what happened in the past and what's going forward. So the first thought is the perennial sources list by some standards is like tiny. I think it's less than 500 domains. And so our take on it, or my personal take, this is not a sort of a wiki-wide take, is that we actually need to go through and kind of force at least tentative evaluations for a lot more media sources. The reason that these come up is because they're repeatedly cited or they're repeatedly in dispute, within the community. And that's how they kind of get on the list because there is some amount of discussion. But it is interesting if you look at historical newspapers, let's say going back, maybe they're reliable in certain ways, maybe not, because obviously even institutional news bias, the last half of the 20th century is debatable. But one thing that is notable is many things are only citable on Wikipedia if they're digitally available. And so you're really only looking at news sites that are, post 1996, when the web kind of became started growing and becoming of age. So that's one. Two, you do have archival articles that are available. And if you are a Wikipedia editor, I'm going to make a plug for the Wiki Library. If you are an active editor, you have access to, I think, newspapers.com and a couple of other sources. ProQuest, I think, is another thing. But in general, your average kind of Wikipedia editor does not necessarily have access to pre-1996 sources. So that's a second thought. And then the third thought would be the sources that are reliable are again sort of a consensus driven and are related to the context of our times. So I'm like a very simple example is the Los Angeles Times, for example, published an article a couple of years ago. My friend was like an editor that apologized for how they covered race. LA Times is historically kind of reliable. But even now, and it was like a post George Floyd thing, acknowledged the failings that they've had in their past. And I think with the mirror of history, looking back, you're always going to have something like that in flux. So I will say this, at least going forward, as we all know, local media is in a crisis. Like whatever, I think something like 20 to 30% of Americans are going to be living in news deserts within the next 5 years. And that there is sort of efforts from all kinds of philanthropic and maybe government corners to at least try to shore up information quality on a local level because they feel like our democracy depends on it. And I do feel like Wikipedia plays a small role because it's one of the places where we can have civilized debates on the internet still. So I know that doesn't completely answer your question, but it kind of hit it in like tiny little ways.
The trends will be very interesting to look at. Like, I don't know if you have big enough data set to like extract anything from there, but we have the history of RSP, right? So we can kind of look back and do some sort of analysis, which I think would be pretty interesting. But any other thoughts, questions, comments? Anyone working on any cool projects related to reliable sources? Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think the comment was about the need for analyzing foreign language sources. On English Wikipedia, for example, you're citing foreign language sources. Other editors might not be able to form a good opinion or have thoughts on that source. So having more kind of like interlanguage efforts might be helpful there. So the question was, how do we judge the reliability of a source for a systemic list? So generally, Wikipedia editors, we have this massive guideline page, this policy page describing how we kind of look at sources. And there's a lot of thoughts that go into it, but it can be things like, is there an editorial process for that source? How reputable are the authors of the source? Do you have provenancy for the information? Are there known biases about the creation of that source, and so on and so forth? For the perennial sources list specifically, that's just a summary of all the discussions that Wikipedians have had related to that source. And those editors presumably would kind of follow these guidelines we have in place. For my tool in particular that I covered, Sight Unseen, this is kind of a downside of Sight Unseen. It's pretty much just me, right? So I'm just kind of like looking at sources and kind of trying to gauge in as well as I can which categorizations that source falls under. But that's not perfect. That's just me. So kind of being able to crowdsource these lists would be a lot more valuable instead of just relying on, a few people to do it. Ryan.
And wonder what you think of the perspective that labeling a source green or red collapses all ambiguity, when in fact most things are a form of gray or whatever the color is between these red. Which a lot of them are broken down into separate sections, like Fox News, as you showed.
but there's a lot of nuance that is lost. And the existence of the RSP page has led to discussions frequently to label entire sources as good or bad.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's a problem that these sort of categorizations can make people kind of put a source completely in one bucket when it shouldn't always be. And as you saw, like on the reliable sources page, we don't say a source is reliable. We say a source is generally reliable. So there's some nuance there in that there's nothing is 100%. And I have seen users of Sight Unseen. I've seen some editors remove a source and say, oh, Sight Unseen said this is unreliable. I have to be like, no, Sight Unseen didn't say that. It's just providing you categorizations. Context matters. You have to like do your own homework. None of these categorizations should be taken as like, 100% truth. They should be viewed as guides to kind of push you in the right direction. But you need to do your own homework. You need to look at the context of how sources are used. Nothing is ever 100%. Unless something is like, totally deprecated and blacklisted, then, but.
I mean, I agree. I don't love it. I don't think, in our ideal world, we would have like nuanced ways of evaluating things. We in our credibility world, CredCon, Credibility Coalition, we have spent a lot of time on thinking about this. And in general, we think one of the most terrible things you ever want is a score, like a numeric score, like a single numeric score is a terrible thing. And that has been an idea that was tossed around by some folks in some folks in the foundation, like in sort of thinking more from a scalable product perspective. And we're like, absolutely not. There are lots of different things that you can, like our ideal situation, and I think this may be still very far off from a mathematical perspective, is things like a nutrition label, right? So it's not like this food is good for you or this food is bad for you, but like carbohydrates, the number of grams of fat, the number of, fat, carbohydrates, and protein. And to a certain extent, it's the collective information from that nutrition label that can give you the information that you need to make a general assessment about whether or not this is good for you in the context that you eat it in. And if we can get, that, the nutrition label took like 25 years to develop. So given sort of the crisis of information and quality is still, I would say a decade or so old. We have a long way to go, but it is definitely different schools of thought, right? Some places just want a score on a scale from 1 to 100 something. Personally, where I come from is I think that causes all kinds of unintended consequences and all kinds of collapse that have second order consequences that we probably will come to regret. One question?
Great. Yeah, we are at time. You have a break now. The closing plenary. Hi. Thank you.
One of the more amazing things, thank you, we appreciate that, is we only found out we were doing this presentation when we looked at the schedule and we're like, look, did someone tell you that we're doing a talk? So came to the slides this morning based on Jake Orlowitz's slides. So I want to give credit to Jake and him.